Hi guys, welcome to today's Tea Talk, and I am so excited today to present to you Miss Jamie of Hopewell. What's the official Hopewell family? What's the
I
official
mean,
title?
it's very, very long. I don't think I was thinking when I named it, but it's Hopewell Family Care Integrative Medicine.
I mean, but it is a little long, but it's perfect. And
Yeah.
integrative medicine, I feel like that sums you up very
But
well.
but people call us just Hopewell.
Yeah, yeah.
So
That's what I tend to call you. It's
yeah.
Hopewell.
hmm
So I am very excited to be talking to Jamie today. And I guess just to back up, to give you guys a little intro before I share kind of what we're going to be talking about, what I'm going to be asking her about. The way that I met Jamie, you guys know that I used to live in Nashville, and I did a home birth with Nova Birth Services. And after I'd had Logan, I was like, okay, I really got to find a great pediatrician. She's got to be kind of on the crunchier side of life, all of that. And you guys actually share a building with Nova. And
We
so
do.
my midwife was like, you have to see Jamie. She's awesome. So we went in, we saw her a couple times, and we were like, wow, she really is like really great. My whole family had come with me because they were in town. And I really liked you just from meeting you. But then
Mm.
once I discovered your Instagram, the like level and the crush I had towards you just like escalated. Because I think that what you share online is so not only, I mean, man, why do I always get chills when I'm saying things? But just thinking about it, I'm like, man, you share such useful, helpful information. And
Mhm.
I don't know if it's just my personality type, but I also like that you're not afraid to say things that may sometimes get a little pushback, is a little off the beaten road, if that's the way to put
Mhm.
it. So,
Yeah, I don't know if I'm not afraid.
mhm,
I think actually sometimes I'm like, why did I post that?
that's
Um,
actually good to know.
But I've actually had a lot of loss in my life from a very early age, like people dying.
Mm,
And it had me like wrestling with my mortality from like a very early age.
mm,
And I literally think things like, um, if I die prematurely or whenever that day comes, I want to know that like I left a mark and I made a difference. Like, and I know that sounds really extreme,
no.
but that's kind of where my brain lives. And so I think it gives me a little bit of chutzpah
Yes,
to like
yes.
to do it. That and I just like wish there had been a me when I was,
Mm,
trying to like work through all the things of
yeah.
motherhood and even before motherhood and just life in general. I wish I had, and I shouldn't say I didn't have anybody. I had different aspects of me that came in the form of like
Mhm.
different people and their roles in my life, but like not a medical me. I didn't have that.
Yes. Well, you're kind of a rarity. There's not a ton of you around from what I'm seeing in the landscape. Um, and I really appreciate that. And I also really appreciate you interjecting and saying it's not that I'm not scared, because
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people feel that, right? And there's that corny saying like courage isn't not feeling afraid, it's feeling the fear and doing it anyways. But you're like, really? Or am I just the one that's scared? So it's good to hear that it's like, no, you've just faced the realities of life, and you've
Yeah.
seen you've seen the lay of the land, and you're like, this is what I have to do. And
Yeah.
so I just gave myself chills again, but I just really appreciate what you've been putting out there.
Yeah.
So I had wanted to reach out to you already just because, like I said, I was so pumped by your work. But recently, well, a couple of things. I think you know this, that I had a miscarriage a few months ago.
Yeah. I'm so sorry.
Thank you. It's definitely been life changing, perspective changing. I've said this a few times. Like my mom never had a miscarriage. Neither of my grandmas, to my knowledge, had a miscarriage. So it's kind of been a newer thing in
Mm,
my direct family. Um,
mm,
and so that's been a part of my life. But then that's kind of sparked certain conversations to happen on my channel and my Instagram.
mhm.
And a few people recently have been asking me questions, not only about hormones, about miscarriage, but then also about conceiving. I don't want to say when you're older, but we'll say in your 30s, conceiving in your 30s. And I know some women conceive even in their 40s.
Mhm.
But I do notice, and I've felt it myself, that there is this feeling that can come up once you're in your 30s that you're like, oh, am I like too late? Like, what do I need to do? How do I need to care for my body? I
Mm,
don't know, in the right way to support it to be able to conceive.
yeah,
And when I reached out to you, I know you said that you were passionate about all of those topics.
I
So
am.
I'm not even sure which one I want to hop into first, just like hormonal health, um, miscarriage. I'm not sure which one I want to touch on first. Is there one that kind of resonates with you to start with, or should I just shoot something out?
Um, you can do whatever you want to do. I would say like this topic is
Mm.
so intertwined, and I like I did a series on miscarriage lately, and I just wanted, I know it sounds a little corny, but I wanted it to be like a virtual hug for like
Oh,
all of the mamas out there, because it's just not talked about enough,
mm,
or even like maybe necessarily the path afterwards, like the like
yes.
how do I go about this? Are there things to figure out? Because you're not really given much, um, by
No.
way of, at all, unfortunately.
I feel like the general answer is just, oh, it's not your fault. And I just want to say, yes, I believe that, right? There's things that we don't know, we will never know. But I
Yeah.
also feel like that's a really disempowering, just like, oh, it's just not your fault. It's like, what if there's something going on though that I can adjust or change?
Yeah.
So yeah, I
I
agree with
think
that.
I even think the 1 in 4 could be a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Like almost like that saying is kind of like brushing it under the rug. Like it's
Totally.
so common, 1 in 4. So therefore, like what you went through
Yeah.
is perfectly normal.
That's a good
And I kind of reject that premise
yeah.
because it's it's not a good place to sit. It's
Mhm.
not a good place to stay. Like
Mhm.
you're just 1 in 4. It becomes, in my opinion, kind of problematic. So if you want to like go forward with that topic, I'm totally okay with that.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea to start there. Like you said, I feel like it all holds hands. It's all related. Is it inappropriate to ask if you've ever had a miscarriage?
It's not inappropriate. And like this is even part of the reason why I am passionate. And I'd like to say like I'm passionate about even things that I've not gone through that I don't know, but like to be quite honest, you do kind of become more aware as like a medical professional. You kind of dive into the things that happen to you. It's kind of human nature.
Totally.
um, and so, yeah, I've actually had 4, and it's peppered all through my motherhood journey. I've had let's see here, I've had like a 14 week. I've had like earlier 6 week, and earlier like eight week, and then I've also had a 20 week. So I've kind of been like all over the place.
Wow.
And definitely had to ask myself like really hard questions, and sometimes delve into researching because I actually knew I was like, someday this is gonna help somebody else. So you really need to kind of like maybe consider a few things that otherwise I probably wouldn't even really want to.
Uh,
So anyway, yeah, I'm definitely a veteran here.
so sorry that you've gone through that.
Yeah,
I
thank you.
can't imagine. I mean, you only have your own thing to compare it to. Um, I miscarried at 10 and a half weeks and it was horrifying. And so anything beyond that's just, yeah, I can't even imagine. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I think like experiences can either like form you into like a more empathetic person that is a bigger resource for other people, or it can like make you maybe bitter and even jaded to the world. And I think I've had both responses. If I'm fair, I'm a
Mm,
human being, you
totally.
know. So yeah, I think it's really important to uh, know like that doesn't have to be your response if you're listening. Like your initial response to miscarriage doesn't have to be like, okay, this I'm going to be a resource to others. But that can happen, if you keep an open heart. And I think that's the hard part, is like keeping an open heart when you're already just so like raw and vulnerable. So I don't think I've mentioned this to anybody yet, but my last miscarriage actually was last year. And so I don't think most people know how like
Wow.
soon and relevant this still is for me.
Yeah.
Um, but it was like in the height of COVID, and I have all sorts of questions as a medical provider, like what caused that. So I think, I think the whole like what caused it question,
Mhm.
um, is something I think I want everybody to know is like normal and natural to kind of like delve down. And I think, um, too often, the medical field actually won't really help you investigate much
Yeah.
till you've had 3 losses. That's
Oh, good for
actually
you.
it's actually a diagnosis code and it's called recurrent miscarriage loss. And so they'll apply that to what's called a recurrent miscarriage panel. And
Mhm.
I'm like, why are we waiting until the third loss to test for any of this?
Yeah, that's
You know,
bizarre. If they have the ability to test in the first place, it's like, why wouldn't that be applied in the beginning?
you can test for that before you ever even have, a pregnancy, like
Have like a
before.
panel of things that are slated for if you had had a miscarriage.
Correct. Like and I get it, it's money,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
insurance companies don't want to cover that.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's a shame,
Mm.
because we could, really avoid a lot of heartache. And, miscarriage is not easy on the body.
Yeah,
It
I didn't know that till I had one. I mean, it makes sense, but you're
Yeah,
kind of like, oh, a miscarriage. Like you just don't even think that deep into it. I feel like as a generalization until you go through it, and then you're
right.
like, what? Like for me, it was like, whoa, that was way intense. Like
It's tough.
I couldn't
It's
believe
so
it.
rough.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, as far as if we're going to talk about preventative care, it's like, why not? Like, women are worth it. I don't care how much that panel costs. Like,
Yeah.
women are worth it to check those type of things.
Yeah.
I really, I'll give a little shout out to my colleague, Brittany Anderson. But she's actually transitioned to, having like a regular, like a kind of women's health clinic,
Mm.
like kind of like mine, with an integrative slant, to actually doing more and more preconception coaching. And it's called Before the Bump. And
Before the bump. That's
Before
cool.
the Bump. And I believe it's online. So, like, anybody listening to this could participate.
Of course.
But it really, she does take into consideration some of these things that I'm talking about to really prep your body for best success.
Yeah.
We as women have been through a whole heck of a lot in the last couple years.
Mhm.
Um, you can go off the grid as much as you want, but you'd have to be under a rock to not have it had impacted you in some form or fashion.
Yes, exactly.
And I'm seeing like hormone panels repeatedly demonstrate like you have been under chronic stress. I can see it more than I've ever seen before. And so all these weird periods that people are having, and periods that repeat themselves, or missed ones, or heavy ones, or like, I'm like, we do the
You are
hormone.
seeing that. That's not like
Oh,
talk online. You as a doc, you are seeing that.
I'm seeing it all the time. And
Wow.
the hormone panel that I'm seeing, it's kind of eerie how similar everybody's are. And I'm like, at that, once I'd seen the eighth one on repeat, yeah, I just got a little
I
goosebump.
know I did. It's weird.
Once I had seen like the eighth one in like 3 weeks, like repeat itself, I was just like, I had the weirdest moment of deja vu, and I was just like, I have seen this so many times, and then it just has kept on happening. And I don't necessarily like, it could be related to the illness, it could be related to the job, but I do think, more than anything, it's related to the fact that as a society, culture, gender, we've all been under, like, our ovaries have been under stress,
Yes,
um,
I
yeah,
totally agree with that. No, and I'm not trying to interrupt you. I just want to say I've had this conversation with so many people. I'm like, how do you even get out of the last few years unscathed? Like,
right,
it's been wild. Even if we take off the table, like you said, the illness or the jab or any of the other stuff, it's like just culturally, what's happening in
right,
the media, just the conversations people are having has been,
yeah,
it's been a lot.
it has been a lot. So, um, I think maybe like a natural place to segue, because at some point I would love to like even have a conversation just about like, things to check to prevent, you know.
Yes. Yes.
But for any mama out there, and if you don't have living children and you've been pregnant, you are still a mama. You carried a life, you carried a baby. Um, for any mamas out there who have had loss, like I'd like to delve into like what is happening in your body, like what is physiologically happening and things that you can do to support yourself.
Yeah.
When I was like, I think I was just so discouraged after my 20-week loss because I was just like, it's going to take me so much freaking time to dig out of this. And I didn't want to do the work. I was just like, I'm going to have to do emotional work. I'm going to have to regulate my nervous system. I'm going to have to like regulate my hormones. Now I'm going to have to lose weight without a baby nursing and helping me out, like calorie wise. My, skin all broke out. You're 15-ish, 20 pounds over what you were. My hair fell out. I was like, I have so much work to do. And I actually thought about taking a break from social media at the time, but I was just like, you know what? No, I'm just going to like journal and write down all of the things. I'm not ready to talk about it yet, but
Yeah.
I'm going to write down all these things so that when I am ready, I'll like remember all of these, parts of this
Yeah.
journey. And so, I think unfortunately, like there is no quick way to recover from a miscarriage.
Mm.
Like you have it, time is a major ingredient. And it's a bunch of bull crap that time heals all wounds. Time does not heal jack.
Mm.
But it is a major ingredient. Like you have to like go through it. I think there's like a little child song and it was annoyingly playing through my head during that time. And it was like, can't go around it, can't go over it, can't go under it. You
Yes.
gotta go through it. And I
Yeah.
was just like, I don't think my oldest was like 2.5 at the time. And I was just like, I don't think she even listens to that song, but it was in my head. And I was just like, can we just like take that out of my head? But it was taunting me. And
Yes.
um but I have a lot of faith. I love God. I knew he didn't do this to me. And so I wasn't like wrestling with like my worth as a person, you
Mm.
know?
Yeah.
And so I started there and I was just like, I am loved. I'm loved by people. I'm loved by God. Like I've done this before. I can do this.
Mm.
And so then I started out actually with regulating my nervous system. That was the first thing that I started with
I don't even
because
know what that,
everything, what did you say?
I don't even know what that looks like what that
Yeah.
means.
So like everything in your body is freaking out after a miscarriage. It is like the biggest insult to your brain. So like practically speaking, what this looked like was like I was having a lot of brain fog.
Mm.
I couldn't concentrate. Word recall was like actually hard for me.
Mm.
I think I went back a little too soon, but like I'm a business owner. And so it was just
Yes.
like, you got
Yeah.
to do what you got to do.
Yes.
Um, but I was like with patience and I knew what I wanted to say and I couldn't say it. And that was so frustrating. Like I couldn't pick the word I wanted. So like an idiot, I would sit there and be like, just give me a minute. I'm going to figure out this word.
The word will come.
It will come. I actually felt like a lot of, like when I was falling asleep, I would startle back up,
Interesting.
a lot of night sweats,
Yes.
like waking up really sweaty or just waking up in general, like not sleeping well.
Yeah.
And just being really sad. I had this like I kind of was glad that I worked because I would like Monday through Friday, I like keep my mind off of it. And then I'd have what's called I call them sad Saturdays.
Oh.
I just had sad Saturdays and I let my friends know
Yeah.
to an extent. I like let if some of them know what was going on.
Mm.
Um and they just let me be sad on Saturdays. They didn't try to fix anything. They just
Like,
let me be what I needed to be.
that's something that, I guess, two things I want to say really quickly is yes, after I miscarried, I mean, the hormone drop is, it's, or whatever is going on with the hormones, it is wild because I was up every night for like the following nights, like all through the night from like 2 to 5 a.m. One night, I've said this a few times, I was just like outside, like staring at the full moon, like crying,
Mhm,
just like so
mhm.
sad and wide awake, but totally like a zombie in a fog. Um, it really is a trip. But so that's kind of one thing. The other thing, when you were talking about time, uh, it is interesting because that idea of like, oh, time heals everything. Well, it doesn't necessarily, because time can go by and it can be like an unproductive, whatever. But my husband and I were just talking about this, like, like a garden, a tree, whatever. It you can't wish it to just happen overnight. You have to let the time play out. So obviously you have to water the garden and fertilize the garden and care for the garden, but you can't just wish for it to just be grown overnight.
Mm,
And so I don't even know why I'm chiming in, just thinking about time, and that yes, in a lot of ways, time just does have to go by. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, circling back, so to the nervous system. So those are kind of some of the symptoms, like startling, the waking up in the night sweats.
Mhm.
Very interesting.
Brain fog, ADD, forgetfulness,
Yeah.
you know, lack of motivation, anxiety, depression, all of those things.
So what did you do when you say that treating your nervous system was one of the
Yeah,
first things that you
yeah.
tackled?
So there is a lot of things that we can do, and I don't want to overwhelm anybody by the amount of options, but chiropractic care comes to mind. That is an amazing nervous system regulation, and depending on like how much stuff have had to happen down there, um,
Mm,
like I end up having to have both a delivery and a surgery like during this last one, and so like you're like it just depends on how much because you're also like probably on your back laying down more than all and your spine can get all locked up, so
yeah.
chiropractic care is really really important.
Okay.
You can purchase what is called a prana mat, and they have like you
Yes.
know and they have cheaper versions of this if that's outside of your budget,
Uh-huh.
or you can just do box breathing like while laying down on the ground if you don't have a prana mat, but
That's where you're like breathing in for 2 seconds. Like what is that pattern again?
yeah, sometimes I see it as 444, if that's
Okay.
easier for you to remember, but you're breathing in for, it's hard to breathe in for 4 seconds, but you can do it.
Okay.
Four, and then holding it
Okay.
for four, and then breathing out for four. And part of that is because if we start shallow breathing, which happens when our nervous system is really overstimulated,
Mhm.
what that's going to do is create a little bit of like a lower oxygen level, which stimulates our brain that we have to breathe faster. And as we breathe faster, our heart starts going faster, our eyes begin to dilate, and then the anxiety kicks in. So it's like a domino boom, 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 boom.
Interesting.
And so regulating your nervous system, like our brain wants to communicate. We've got like the crazy side and the more like regulated side. And it's like the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic. And
Mm,
the parasympathetic wants to tell the sympathetic, hey, everything's okay. But if your heart rate is too high, it can't like communicate to the other side.
interesting.
So, like, even just getting your heart rate down and your breathing down can allow your brain to kind of heal more.
Okay. I
Um,
actually have a prana mat and I didn't know, like, so just lying on your prana mat is just helpful.
yes.
Interesting. Okay. I thought
Yeah.
it was just more of like a muscular thing. Apparently, I didn't do enough research into my prana mat. So that's really good to know because
Yeah.
I need to whip out my prana mat.
Yeah. Yeah. And two more like more kind of like more in-depth treatments would be an NET
Mm,
or neuro emotional technique.
mm,
In this area, I know two providers. One's Dr. Philip Parkinson with Zozo Wellness, and the other is Dr. Crystal Rodenbeck. Um, and they are really, really good NET providers. But neuro emotional technique is literally tapping into your nervous system and tapping into your nervous system and literally kind of like a chiropractor would adjust your spine, like regulating your nervous system. And they'll do so by like feeling your pulse points and kind of even like assessing your organs in a way, and they can like literally find emotions that are like trapped in your organ sets
Oh,
and help
wow.
remove them. um and you actually do some breathing techniques and different things to connect your nervous system with what's happening, but it
Mhm.
is the most regulating thing I think I've ever experienced in my life. um
Wow, that's incredible.
yeah. And I actually have a website I can share with you
That would
after
be great.
this, that people can punch their zip code in and try to find
That would
um,
be great.
a specialist around them that does that. So,
Cool.
and then the other thing that I did was I actually saw a therapist, like a actual like counselor,
Mhm.
and did what is called brain spotting. Have you ever heard of brain
I have
spotting?
not heard of brain spotting.
So brain spotting is again back to that idea that your brain wants to connect one side to the other, like it wants to heal itself.
Mm,
And this is actually brain spotting is used with trauma, emotional trauma,
mm,
but also physical trauma. They actually find that the same centers of the brain that like happen with a head injury
mhm.
are similar to the same sort of trauma that happens with emotional injury.
Wow.
And so brain spotting is they basically find your visual field
Okay.
that like so it could be your alpha, beta, theta, like there's four major brain waves that they're
Yeah.
looking at. And they have you kind of with a spotter, like some of them will use a pen, and they'll actually have you start to talk and talk about, whatever you went through. And they'll watch you because at a certain visual field, you'll be more symptomatic and you might swallow a lot, or you might put your body back, or um, different physiological symptoms will let them know, oh, that's the part of the brain that's damaged.
Wow.
So then as you like talk and you're looking at that focal point, which they have a safety point they bring you to, they let you rest. They don't like just keep you in this heightened state the entire time.
Okay.
But it's almost as if your brain can better process that trauma when you're like looking at that specific focal point of damage. And you can feel like you've kind of run a mental marathon after that. You can feel very, very tired. That's a common symptom. But the after days, it can have such a profound effect. Yeah, it was really, really cool. So those would be some of the like you need other people to do them to you type things, except for the
Yeah.
breathing.
Yes.
As far as supplements go,
Mm,
I think magnesium is so crucial.
mm,
Specifically, like maybe like a magnesium glycinate or a magnesium threonate, like they will really help your nervous system calm down, get into like a deeper sleep when you need to be sleeping.
okay.
Because for me, it was like at nighttime when my brain would start going, why this happen? How'd this happen? And I'd start like, don't research, Jamie. Don't do it. Don't do it. And some nights I would win, and other nights I went down the wormhole and I didn't sleep. And in the morning I was even worse.
Yes.
So magnesium is super important. I really love passion flower. It's a really benign treatment.
Yeah.
Passion flower tincture. And a tincture, for those who don't know it, is essentially like a really, really strong tea. And so they put all these herbs into a very small amount of alcohol, or if you are like, for religious reasons, will never do alcohol, you can probably find like a glycerin based one. But it pulls out the medicinal qualities of that plant. So you actually only have to use a little, like a few drops at a time.
Yeah. That's interesting. Passion flower. I haven't taken that in a while, but that's makes total sense for calming you down. Okay.
Right. And so you can take that throughout the day as needed for anxiety, or like in those moments where your thoughts are going nuts.
Yeah.
I found like right before bed to be the most helpful.
Mm. Yeah,
So,
that was my experience with it. I remember taking it kind of in my teenage years sometimes to help me sleep.
mhm.
That's interesting.
And then just keep in mind too, like remember your nervous system and your gut hold hands.
Mm,
They inform each other.
mm.
And so anytime you have anything going on with your gut, it is going to make your nervous system symptoms even like even more profound or exacerbated. And
Mhm.
so during that time, I was like taking a probiotic with my magnesium at night. And I also, because I was going to a muscle tester who did see that I had parasites at the time. So I was just like, oh, I have to. I travel a lot. I do some nonprofit work in El Salvador. And so I was like, I don't want to do a parasite cleanse right now.
Oh,
I
those
don't want to do it.
parasites.
But I knew, I had a few different parasites going on, like emotional parasite with
Oh
everything
my
like
gosh.
mentally you're going through, and then one in your intestine, and you have to like understand like you're not going to heal, if your brain's on fire and your gut's on fire.
Ooh, that's a good saying. You're not going to heal if your brain is on fire and your gut's on fire. Ooh,
Right. Right. So,
yeah. So
and
keep going. Sorry.
no, I said, and yeah, go ahead.
Um, okay. So post miscarriage, those are some of the things that you really did to just calm yourself
Yeah.
down, get through that period of time and heal. Um, for what did you do? And I don't know if you're trying again or what you would say to mamas who are trying again after
Yeah.
they had miscarried. What would be the protocol, I guess you would say, or what would you recommend for mamas
hmm
to do afterwards to move forward with that, with trying to conceive again?
So if you haven't had that repeated miscarriage panel, I would, mine is like a mixed bag. I have probably one of the worst forms of MTHFR.
Oh,
And
so you
so
do have, okay, that's a whole separate thing. Go on, go on. I'm trying to not sidetrack us, but I have that as well, and I had been
yeah.
told by a practitioner like 12
Mhm.
years ago, like, "Wow, it's really good that we found this because you'd basically be doomed to miscarriages if you hadn't." And
Mhm.
I find it very eerie that this last year I had a lot going on in my life this last year with moving across the country and a whole other slew of work things that like exploded in my face.
Yeah.
But I stopped taking methylated folate during that. I was not taking it the whole time. And so
Mhm.
afterwards, when everything unfolded, it was like this all came to my face of like, oh my gosh, I've been taking that for like a decade and I stopped and I miscarried. And I know backing up to what we said in the beginning, right? So many things, who knows? But
Right.
that's fascinating that you brought that up. And I didn't know there were different types of MTHFR gene mutations.
There are. So for everybody's like, what is MTHFR? That sounds like a cuss word. It is kind of a mother effer. um, and it really predisposes your body to not being able to detox as well. And so, there's a lot of women who miscarried over the last 2 years, a lot of women who didn't. And so I think for those of us that are predisposed to not being able to detox as well, I think we're a little bit at a disadvantage with everything going on.
Mm.
Um, and some of this, there was supposition that, this virus also caused some clotting issues, which you do have a little bit more predisposition to that with MTHFR. The
Mm.
research is still kind of battling itself out whether everybody should be on aspirin, a baby aspirin, or not be on a baby aspirin with MTHFR. But
Okay, that's interesting. I had never heard that. Is it inappropriate to ask, do you take baby aspirin?
I have with some of my pregnancies, and other
Oh,
times, like
interesting.
I thought I was just like, I'm not comfortable with it this time. So I was watching the research very closely. Some neonatologists are like, "Bah, not a need." Some people just really downplay it, and others are like, "No, I'm putting you on Lovenox, which is basically like an injection in your stomach every day to keep your blood from not clotting." So like it's hard when the medical community quibbles over a topic,
Yeah.
and there's no like specific rest. I think taking a baby aspirin, they were even suggesting it across the board in pregnancy during this pandemic,
I had
and
never heard that. That's fascinating.
and so, but you're right. The folate is also important. Do you get absolutely no folate in your diet? Of course you do. Um, but again, those who have MTHFR and the different variants, I don't, want people to get so hung up on those,
Mm,
because really it's just kind of like you're more at a disadvantage if you have a compound variant, and less at a disadvantage if you only have one.
mm,
And there's a few types that are more likely to cause miscarriage versus like nervous system issues like depression, anxiety, I really think at the end of the day, like you can probably see similarities across the board with any of the variants. So it's just
Mm,
like, no matter what, just support your body.
yeah.
Um, and there's also too like some other genetic mutations out there that are similar to MTHFR that end with the same result. So it's like,
Wow.
like I don't want people to become like, I am MTHFR. It defines me,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, because I think at the end of the day, we all just need to support our detox processes,
Yeah, that
so you don't have to like become wrapped up in the identity of it.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I would get tested for it because it's very easy to treat it.
Yeah.
Um, the miscarriage panel, all of the things on there are relatively easy to like treat.
Mm,
Um, I think also assessing the landscape of your gut is important. And, because as a mama, you want to be able to absorb the nutrients so that you can support a baby.
mm,
Um, and your gut is your major detox pathway.
mm,
And so if there's something wrong with your gut, your nutrient absorption and your ability to detox could be a little bit compromised.
mm.
And not only do we not want that for the baby, we don't want that for the mama.
Yeah.
Being pregnant is hard enough. And the baby's precious. We care about the baby, but we also care about the mama. Like,
Yeah. So now
um,
when you say checking the gut, are these things that are also going to be run in that recurrent miscarriage panel? Or are you talking about a separate like situation?
yeah, that's a really good question. There's a few different ways to do this. Honestly, I think the most cost effective and timely is doing gut testing via muscle testing.
Okay.
Um, some people aren't comfortable with muscle testing because I think they don't understand the science behind it. We're in the South here, or I'm in the South. Well, you're still in the South. Um,
No, I'm in the north now. I'm in Idaho.
you're in Idaho. Okay.
I'm
So,
opposite. Go on.
yeah, right. Um, but I think people bring you have to understand, like, as a provider, I'm really need to pay attention and respect, what you're bringing to the table culturally,
Mm,
morally,
mm,
spiritually, like, and that plays into whether you're going to want to do the intervention that I'm recommending.
mm,
And so the South is the Bible Belt, and maybe even a little bit more conservative than the North. I'm from Illinois. And so if you don't explain muscle testing well, I really do feel like some of them think you're recommending black magic.
mm.
And it's a no-go,
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So I've had muscle testing done before, and I'm open to all the woo woo wee wah stuff. Like being from Los Angeles and going to natural health practitioners, I'm like, sure, I'll try it. Side note, because this is not to discourage that, and I want you to finish the thought, but I've never had like super great results from muscle testing. And I
mm,
don't know, like, because I know the brain impacts the body as well. It's like maybe I just don't get the science. And so I'm like, okay, pushing on my arm. So
yeah.
maybe that's part of it. But that being said, continue forward.
So, like, muscle testing can be used for a bunch of different modalities, and I don't find it as helpful for things like maybe food testing. Although people use it for food testing, I feel like the research shows that can have like a little bit of variation in success. Um, Maybe even for supplements, it can be a little interesting. But what I find it's very, very accurate for, and side note, I'm not even saying don't try to use it for those other things.
Mm,
I'm still open to it, but what I find it very accurate for, and it very much tracks with my patient symptoms, is muscle testing for stealth infections. So, like, let's go through
interesting.
the stealth infection list. Like, what is that? Anything from like viruses that your body's holding on to pathogenic bacteria that it's holding on to, such as like strep. It can
Wow.
test for like yeast overgrowth, protozoa, and parasites,
Okay.
mycotoxins, and mold, which have huge reproductive ramifications. Holding on to things like pesticides and glyphosates and herbicides. And regardless if you have MTHFR or not, you might be storing those in your body, and your detox pathways may not have like mobilized those and moved those out. You can
Interesting.
be from like detasseling from Illinois, like cornfields. And then when you're 40, muscle test and still have those same herbicides and pesticides in your body
It's wild.
because like you weren't intentionally like moving those out.
Yeah.
And your detox pathways really like are never fully closed, otherwise it would not be compatible with life.
Mm,
But like think about your breath, your urine, your bowel movements, and then I'm missing a major one, sweat.
there you go.
And so if those have any issue with, which so many of my patients come to me with like constipation, or they
Mm,
can't sweat, or they don't emote, or they're not like taking full deep breaths. Like we detox so much from our breath, or if they do sweat, they only sweat in the summertime, not the winter time. And,
that's interesting.
and so that being said, there is plausible reason as to why we would accumulate these stealth infections.
Yeah.
And so looking through them via muscle testing, I love because it's so cost effective. I
Mm,
can use more like streamlined labs to send all these off. Like I can do urine for mold. I can do stool for parasites and yeast. I can, I can send a heavy metals test off.
mm.
But it's gonna like rack up to $1,000 like really quickly.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
and that's the like insult of like having a miscarriage. Sometimes it's expensive.
Yeah.
Like my hospital bill is like, oof, it's like it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so like I don't have an extra $1,000.
Yeah.
And so I do like muscle testing for stealth infections for that reason, because you can kind of get, where you need
Yeah.
those results sooner than later. And I will say the other thing for like more streamlined testing, it sometimes takes like 5 weeks to get those things back. So
Oh, yeah. And
where,
sorry, go on.
whereas muscle testing, you get it same day.
It's
So
immediate. Yeah. So you find it effective both in time and the cost. That's very interesting. And
yeah.
you're opening me back up to it because, yeah, like I said, it had pretty much been for food.
Mm,
Um, that was pretty much the primary thing. And when I was
yeah.
doing it, I was like, oh, I don't. So that's interesting that you've noticed that it's been very effective for like viruses and parasites and all of that. And
Mhm.
that's noted. Okay, very interesting. So I don't know if you have more to say on that or if I just ask you questions about the next.
I mean, I will just say like some patients have chosen to do both,
Mm,
and I'm never going to sit there and be like, you don't trust me, like
yeah.
like there is a still like a very psychological aspect to testing and acknowledging different aspects of
Mhm.
science. I'm always encouraging them to do what they think is good for them. So like, yeah, that's all I'll.
Do you have a summary to explain? Because I know we were talking about not understanding the science of it. Is there
Mhm.
a way for you to kind of
Yeah.
explain what that
Yeah.
is?
So, we are electrical beings. Unfortunately, it's why we can be electrocuted. It's why we can be struck by lightning, why we get out of the pool during a thunderstorm.
Uh,
Um, and so, like, everything in our body is electric, it's an electric current.
mm,
Um, and so, when we hook somebody up to a heart monitor, we're putting electrodes on their heart, and then via the wires, it goes to the screen, and then we're seeing that electrical, pattern of the heart. And we understand that it's going through the wires. And so we like trust that. We have faith in that. We have faith in that monitor, that that's actually our heart. Um,
yes.
back in whenever, I don't remember what year the light bulb was invented. I probably should look that up because I reference this often. But they thought that was witchery.
Yeah, yeah.
The light bulb is witchery. So we're
I
kind
mean,
of,
it's pretty crazy.
it is crazy. Sometimes I find myself staring at the light bulb going, how does this work?
I'm straight up wondering how I'm talking to you on the other side of the country right now, and it's being
Right.
recorded. But
Right.
go on.
Yeah, I'm with you. But so muscle testing for self-infections is electrical too, because everything, all matter, like even this stethoscope has matter to it. And if you look at matter, it's going to have a proton, electron, and a neutron composition to it. And so what they do is they typically put, a vial in your hand, and that has a specific like set of protons, electrons, and neutrons to it. And so your body is gonna for every you know every positive reaction, there's like a negative reaction. That's kind of
Uh,
like the science behind it.
okay.
And so when you're holding on to that, these people, they didn't get trained in a weekend. I mean, these people have been like trained for a very long time, and
Mm,
they will assess how your electrical patterns change, even how your muscles, the response of your muscles change
yeah.
in relation to that. And so there's, that's the sans, the wires, sans the screen,
Yeah.
they don't have those things, but so it's a person interpreting that electrical current at that point then. And
That's
I think it's awesome, but somehow I think we have more faith in the machine than we do a person,
mm.
Um,
Well, that
so
explanation is really good and makes a lot of sense. And I kind of mean it. It's like, okay, if I'm going to do this again, I did kind of want to
no,
re-understand
yeah,
because you do get this feeling of like, okay, push on my arm or whatever. So that totally makes sense though.
yeah. So, that's a little bit more of a simplistic explanation. I'm sorry if like Dr. Motley or Dr. Crystal watches this and I get it like completely wrong.
They're like, oh no. No, I feel like you got the gist. And that was a good basic, I don't know, I'm not a doctor, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, okay, keep going. I don't want to like take us off a path if you're not.
No, so that, I think that if you're going to neurologically heal, you have to heal your gut, and
Mm,
healing your gut sets you up for success,
mm,
both hormonally and to carry that pregnancy and to detox in the way that we were designed to detox, you
yeah.
know? So it just sets us up for success. Again, that darn time being like, the ingredient we cannot take out of the equation.
That's such a
So
good way to word it. The ingredient we can't take out of the equation because, like you said, it's not everything, and you got to help your body along. But that's a good way to put it. The ingredient you can't take out of the
yep,
equation.
yep.
So, okay, I don't know if this is an inappropriate time to segue onto that, but speaking of time and age,
Mm.
how do I word this question? I've been asked a few times from people like, "Hey, Nikki, could you talk about conceiving in your 30s or conceiving when you're older?" Um,
Mm.
and they weren't super specific questions, but I've seen a lot of interest around it. And I
Mm.
can understand why, because like I said, my brain has been even more like, oh man, like not necessarily am I too old, but there's like these vague thoughts of like, yeah, is it a problem? What can I do to specifically support myself? Is it all the same thing, kind of as what we were talking about before? Do you see, I don't know, what do you see within your practice in regards to women
Yeah.
conceiving when they're older? It's kind of a lot of questions and you can kind of take it, but just kind
Yeah.
of the topic in general.
Well, I would say it doesn't phase me, for
Mm.
mamas of, I don't know how to phrase it, like a more mature age, a more ready
Yeah.
age.
They like to call it just, what do they call it? Gestational or something like that? Or geriatric. That's the
They
word. They
call
call
it
it geriatric. Yeah.
geriatric. I
Yeah.
think that's harsh. It's
I
so harsh.
know.
Um, but it doesn't phase me to see these mamas coming in, pregnant. Some of them are healthier than maybe I was even in my 20s, before I knew things,
Wow.
and so um sometimes they say that age is just a number, and where I would also say like OBGYNs would probably disagree with me about the age of our eggs in our ovaries. I would say part of that is because your DNA can get jacked up over time.
Mhm. Mhm.
You add heavy metals to your body, which is way easier said than done. It's a whole nother topic of conversation. I'm covering that right now this week because I'm like, this is so important.
Mhm.
But like, there's a lot of things that can denature our DNA.
Mhm.
And so, I was in a very vulnerable spot when I was in the hospital. Literally had a doctor have terrible bedside manner who told me it was my fault. Um,
No, Stop. Are you serious?
I'm dead serious. I had to do a whole therapy session over that part because, I can tell myself the truth, but someone speaking those words over you, is
What was he saying? Are you referring to age? Is that what he was?
no, it was
Okay.
a she, it was a female. And I'm just like,
Oh my
even more so, but I sometimes feel like females eat their young for lunch.
God.
All that to say, there was
Yeah, you
annoying
don't have, yeah.
things there. But I asked another gentleman, another doctor the next day, because I was just so torn up about that comment. It ate me up all night long. And I asked him, I was like, what do you think caused this? And he was like, it was bad luck. He was like, it's like a slot machine where like you pull the lever and then your ovaries just like send out an egg, and the older you are, the more likely you are to send out like a blighted ovum or a damaged ovum. So like it got me like, I knew that already. I just, again, being a human being and needing to ask for myself because I'm a mama and I'm a female and I needed to ask somebody.
Yeah.
um and so, and even to pause right there and just be like, I hope you all know that nobody is above asking questions and nobody is above being vulnerable. And then even if you are like a medical professional that's supposed to know everything, you're still a human being with like human needs. So like,
Oh, I love your heart. I love that. Yes.
but don't ever forget that. Like, I think sometimes it's like, we need to grow up, be stronger, thicker skin. And I'm like, it's okay to be whoever you are in that moment. So, your occupation or you're standing at church or like whoever you are in your friend circle, it doesn't exclude you from getting your basic human needs met.
Yes.
So,
I love that.
but anyway, he said that, and I got my brain like rethinking about that, and I was just like, oh, but we can like reverse DNA damage. Like we can reverse that.
Yes.
And it got me again thinking like, oh, if you open up your detox pathways, you get rid of parasites, you get rid of heavy metals, you get rid of these pesticides that are hanging on your body. You start to do things like move, sweat, get morning light, like all these things that help your cells regenerate.
Yes.
If you're helping every cell in your body, that includes what's happening in your ovaries.
Yes.
And so I think we can set ourselves up best for having like putting out the best genetic material out there.
Yeah.
And can we have control over everything? No,
Yeah.
please don't get neurotic about it.
Yeah.
The moment you do that, you like lose yourself and your sanity. So like, don't start like lying to yourself to say that you can control your fertility. I think it's the one thing like we will never have complete control over.
Yeah.
I've got to find some peace with that.
Yeah.
Um, we can do everything right and it's still not necessarily like work out.
Yeah.
But there are some of those things that we can do to kind of give us maybe the best advantage in a very broken world. Like the amount of things that us as women have to like come up against, like there's just such an onslaught to our body at all times. And so we do have to be our best advocate. We do have to research for ourselves. We do have to fight for our line, in a way. Yeah, I think I don't think that it's too late to have a baby in your late 30s or early 40s. I've seen it done on repeat, and I think it takes faith, but I think it takes faith when you're younger too, because we don't get to see everything that's happening in there. There has to be like a lot of trust in God, or whatever way you think about that, to know that like that's not something that you have to do. We're not God. Thank God we're not God. But it's there is a lot of trusting in that, in those 9 months, or if you go longer. I'm like 43 weeks over here every time.
You are?
Yeah.
What? Wild. And I delivered my son right before 38 weeks. And I told my husband, I'm like, how am I supposedly going to go to like I hear that all the time, especially first time mothers, like 42 weeks. I'm like, how am I going to go another month? I feel like I can't. And sure enough,
Yeah.
I knew my body and I couldn't. I just went into labor. Um,
I love that for you.
you what? You love that for me? I
I
loved it for
do.
me. I felt like I was really done. Well, I was going to say two things. One, I have a friend, it's interesting, and this is something I've kind of held on to in the process as well. She has three children now, and she's had one miscarriage, and her miscarriage was actually when she was like 21. So it was when
Mhm,
she was much younger. And
mhm,
since then, she's had no more miscarriages. So I found that very interesting. Um,
mhm,
this idea of like, yeah, see, you don't control life, and don't get too caught up in the age thing, because that was the only one she ever had, was like in the prime of her youth.
right.
That's kind of the first thing. And the second thing is, I think it's very interesting, tapping back on what you were saying, this idea of like, because I've started to hear this kind of regularly as I'm looking now, that like, yes, your age is like an important factor, but I'm hearing a lot of people say that you can dramatically improve the quality of your eggs, which I think is this exact same thing you were saying, like with altering your DNA.
Mhm,
And so I find that very, like, even though we can't control things, like we were just saying, I find that very empowering. The thought of like, okay, I can improve the quality of my eggs. Um,
mhm.
and it's interesting to hear you say the same thing, I guess, is the
Yeah.
point of
And I think finding peace with that is really important. Like, if we can, while we're in the conception stages and then developing a baby in our uterus stages, like find peace with not always having control.
that. Mm,
And in the same way, being proactive, if we can find the way to toe that line, um, and it will serve you so well and
mm,
when that baby is earthside, because for the amount of time like that I felt anxious on the front end of it, it could not compare to the amount of like, oh my gosh, I am so anxious about making this baby survive now that they're earthside,
yeah. Uh-huh.
and so like it prepares you like kind of a way, because our nervous system is built upon habits, and
Mm,
the way that you let your brain go
mm.
really will inform the way that your brain goes as a mother,
Okay.
and I mean
Interesting.
with that baby like earthside, you're a mother no matter what, so I'm
Yeah.
not trying to differentiate that, but
That's
so like when
such a
that
good way to
baby,
word it, because
yeah,
I've been a little worried about like, what am I going to be like if and when I get pregnant again? Like, am I
mhm,
just going to be worried all of the time? But that is such a good way to think of it, as like, well, once they're here, it's a whole other set. So practicing that
practicing. Mhm,
feeling of like letting it go. And I like what you said about straddling the line of
mhm,
being proactive, but realizing that you don't actually have control. Like, to a degree, it's an illusion. Um,
mhm,
and I think that that's like a worthwhile place to aim for, because I've known people before, like I said, who they're just like, well, I guess we'll never know, and they have no desire to try to like, hey, maybe there's something we could do here. But then I
mhm,
could very easily see how it could slip onto the other side of thinking that like, if I do everything perfect, and like getting very neurotic and like, I have to do this, and getting like emotionally invested to a degree where it's like unhealthy, because you're not actually attached to the reality of the
yeah,
situation.
yeah,
So I think that that's, yeah, a worthwhile place to strive to be, and to pray to be, to,
mhm.
yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you again, but
That's great. I love it when you recapitulate what I said. I'm like, oh, I said that. That was
oh, good. Yes,
that
you're
was
saying lots of like
good.
helpful things and reassuring things.
Well, I mean, I understand it medically, but I've also lived it. And so, if you get to a place where like anxiety is always winning, like you do definitely want to kind of like, take a step back right then and kind of figure out what's going on. Like, is it like a spiritual thing? Is it a friend thing? Is it like a relationship with your, significant other thing? Is it inside you? Like it, because stealth infections inside your body, and heavy metals and pesticides, they actually can change the microbiome of your gut to basically predispose you to anxiety. And so if you're like doing all the things like sleeping, keeping your blood sugar regular and getting plenty of protein, doing the deep breathing thing, like you're doing all the things and it's still not working, it should like tip you off to like, oh, there must be something wrong with my terrain because my body's not getting the message. And so if you live in anxiety land, don't just think that you are relegated to that for the rest of your life. There's hope.
Mhm.
And just like we look at a plant, like if we look at a plant and it's all yellow and droopy and it's not growing, the first, we're not like, what's genetically wrong with that plant? Or we're not like, what medication can we put in this plant?
Yeah, you
Where
get into
we typically say things like, does it have enough nutrients? Are there
yeah.
pests? Are there pests, stealth infections inside that soil? Like
Mhm.
what's challenging the root system?
Mhm.
What's the root cause? Like we ask questions about a plant, and
Oh,
we're very much complicated plants. I'm not saying
yeah.
we're we're like little house plants, but to the same degree, like I'm just saying it's a really worthwhile question to be like, what's in my terrain? Like
Totally.
what's causing these symptoms?
Yeah.
And never am I saying you can't use medication, because also like being able to sleep is
Yeah.
important. And if you can't because you're so anxious, you won't heal. So like
Yeah.
sometimes using a little medication to help you get from point A to point B, there's no shame.
Yes,
So
totally.
um
Yeah,
yeah.
and interesting because after I miscarried, well, first off, I'm from Los Angeles. I'm a native Angelino, and I'm not only a native Angelino, but I'm like a city girl originally. Like we never gardened growing up. I never had a house plant. And
Mm,
when my husband and I were like, we got to get out of LA, we went to Nashville. I acquired a house plant and I started gardening, and I became a fake homesteader with like chickens. And that's actually what led me to want to have a child, was like being so up close with life and seeing
mm,
like the miracle of planting a seed and then seeing something come up. Like the whole thing was so mind blowing. And I have found and continue to find so many parallels, if that's the word, between just nature and life. It actually gives me chills even thinking about it, because I'm not trying to be conspiratorial, but I think it's potentially purposeful or just an unintended consequence of city life and being so disconnected from life. I think we miss out on a lot of lessons that would be like directly applicable to us.
yeah.
But that being said, after I miscarried, that's been the analogy that I've been using this whole time, is like my body is a garden, and clearly my garden needs to be tended to. Like
Mm,
exactly what you said, all the things that you would do to care for these plants, like you wouldn't just be like, oh well, I guess it was just like a luck of the draw. Like you would try to figure out, okay, what's going on, like you said, with the soil,
mm,
with the dirt, with the roots. Are there pests? Like how
mm,
does it need more sun? Does it need a less sun? All of that.
mm.
Yeah, I think the garden and plant analogy is perfect. Like you said, we're more complex plants, but it's
Yes.
like that's perfect.
Hey, here's a crazy thing. People are gonna like, okay, she's crazy now after I said it. But there is like a research that talks about like talking to your plants,
Yes,
and
yes.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
and that if you speak like words of life or positivity, they will
Yes.
go. And if you're like, you're a terrible plant, you don't ever do anything. I'm whispering because I've got plants
Yeah.
in here,
I know.
but
I've got plants. You're all great.
you're so good. We love
We
you.
appreciate you.
But they've done this in labs,
Yeah,
and like watch the plant with like positivity thrive, and the ones with these negative words like shrivel
yeah.
and not thrive. And I would just like to say, like, all of you out there deserve words of life and
Mhm.
positivity. And
Mhm.
it just like hurts my heart if you didn't get that during, a season of miscarriage. And so if you're listening right now, know like you are worthy, you are loved, you are not broken, you're not a lemon. Your body is beautifully and wonderfully made, and you're going to survive and you're going to endure. And so if no one said those words to you, like, hear them. I know it's like,
Yeah.
and receive them.
Mm.
Because I think as a culture in general, we need to take lessons about how to hold space for those who are grieving,
Mm.
and I can say that's one thing I'm like really good at holding space for people,
Yeah.
because I've been through it. Boy, have I been through it.
Mm.
And that you don't have to, I would say it is not a qualification. Like, you don't absolutely have to go through something hard to be able to hold space for people.
Yeah.
So if you're like, I haven't been through that, you can
Yeah.
still be an amazing friend, amazing support.
Mhm.
And so, just listening. I know, um Birth Uprising. Do you follow
Yes.
her?
Uh-huh. Yes.
She and I recently collaborated on like a list of the things that like a friend could do to support somebody through
Oh,
miscarriage when you haven't been through one. And so, you
that's
know,
amazing.
yeah, and I think she's posted it already.
On
You
Instagram?
know, yeah. Would you say?
On Instagram?
Yeah, on
Okay.
Instagram.
Okay.
But it's kind of like some people are left, they're like, well, how do I support someone? I don't know what they need. And I think that's a valid question.
Yes.
And sometimes if you ask a mama who's going through it, what do they need? They don't even know how to verbalize it. So
Oh, totally. I was so out of it afterwards. That's really a great idea.
I had some of the ideas came from like a really sweet pair of friends of mine, Heather and Tara, and they came over and they brought this basket and it had things like electrolyte drinks in it, magnesium, a big blanket, socks, you
Oh,
know, some gift cards to some like more nutritious restaurants that I could just like cash
wow.
in for lunch, like nourishing me, caring for
Oh,
me, caring for the
yes.
mother, and I it spoke volumes to me. So,
That's so
yeah,
cool. That was something, yeah, that I learned as well. Like you said, you don't have to go through something hard to relate to someone going through something hard. And I totally agree with that. But going through this, like it brings you another level of like awareness.
yeah,
And also, I've said this a couple of times too, gratitude for the people who do step up in that way. And it really gave me an awareness of like, not only the times that I've maybe stepped up and I didn't realize it was that big of a deal. It was just like, oh yeah, sure, here's a meal. And like, I didn't even realize the gravity of like, oh, that was really helpful. That meant a lot to them.
yeah,
But it also just encouraged me in the future of like, oh, do you see how much this means? Like, this is really helpful to be there for people who've
yeah.
gone through it. And suffering like that, it definitely does something to you. I talked about this in my last tea talk. It changes you.
So I'll show this to you. I don't know if it'll like look the same. I can send you a picture that's not
Yeah.
reversed, but I have this on my desk. I look at it every day. This was actually made by a really sweet friend of mine. I consider her a niece. She actually made this before she actually lost somebody really special to her. So she made this like a couple years before it even happened.
Wow.
But this is a quote by Ella Correa. He was one of the Jesuit priests who survived the genocide in El Salvador. And so, but this quote is, there are many things that can only be seen through eyes that have cried. And so, like, it's this just, I look at this every single day and I'm like, that's the truth.
That is
um,
totally the truth. I've
so
shows everywhere.
yeah, so I hope that no one out there goes through anything difficult, but if you have like um, I would hope for any mama out there that you can take this talk and get the support and help you need to like stabilize yourself, your nervous system. And then as you heal, you will not be able to help but be a resource for other people.
Exactly.
Um, and you can't pour from an empty cup. That saying is well known. I don't know.
Like I've done it.
I've done it. I've done it. But
You're
but
also a business owner. That's a special breed.
yeah, yeah.
No, I don't mean to make light of that, but yeah.
No, it's you're not. I'm correlating with what you're saying. But I will say, like, if you heal and you're intentional with it, you will end up being a bright light to other people. It's just what happens, what we do as women, women helping women, supporting other women. It's like it's in our it runs in our blood.
Mm.
So
And I
yeah.
got that vibe from your whole doctor's office, by the way. What from the Nova crew, from
Mm.
your whole group. It was just I like seeing that you walk that out, and it was just very much a vibe I picked up on. Like I said, I love that.
Yeah.
I have an annoying final question. You're probably going to be like, Nikki, I literally already told you that. But this is just what's on my mind right now. This really is about annoying. But so just to reaffirm, you have in your experience seen many women in their late 30s conceive and healthy, like they've conceived a healthy child.
Yeah.
Not something that's a rarity that you've seen.
It is not rare. In fact, it's happening
Interesting.
more and more and more.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And the moms
I-
are fine and the babies are fine.
oh yeah. Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
And I think that's just because I think people are, sociologists will say people are getting married a little bit later,
Mhm.
or deciding on that like life partner a little bit later.
Yeah.
Um, and in a way, like, it's preached, like, get your stuff in order before, you have a kid. I don't really feel like there's any convenient time to have a kid. I think that's an illusion.
Yeah. I think that.
But some people really do, like, need that house paid off, that car paid off, that secure job to feel like they can enter into, like, responsibly bringing a child into the world.
Yeah.
Some don't care about that at all. And
Mm.
I don't think there's like a wrong or a right. Like no one can decide when it's right for you. That's your right to procreate.
Yeah.
Um, but I would say from a health perspective, I'm just encouraged all the time by like these mamas who are just like having their babies late into their 30s and 40s. I mean, there is a reason we don't stop ovulating. Like if we were supposed to not stop having babies, like it should happen a little bit sooner. Like, you
That
know.
just gave me chills as well. That's
Mhm.
a really great point. And I feel like the general cultural thing is like, I mean, that's the whole reason I'm asking it, right? That it's like, oh, you're getting old. But it's like the more that I'm digging in, I'm starting to hear this exact sentiment repeated. Um,
Mhm.
so that's kind of part of what I'm holding on to as well. And clearly, like I said, from people who watch my channel, they were kind of wondering hesitantly the same thing. So to hear from you that it's not a rarity, like not only
Mhm.
is it happening, but it's not rare and it's happening regularly is
Mhm.
very, very encouraging. I got married at 20. I have a whole other story as to why I didn't try to conceive, why we didn't try to conceive earlier.
Yeah.
But there have been those moments in this past while of being like, did I gamble it away? Like I had my person. Why didn't we do this sooner?
Mhm.
And so just to hit that point home again, that's very reassuring, and I appreciate hearing that.
Absolutely.
And thank you for all of this. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
I was just saying, I'm telling myself the same thing,
Yeah,
So,
yes.
it's a vulnerable place to be, like trying to decide, or like that whole deciding phase. Like, are we going to bring another child into the world? It's like it's a vulnerable spot to be in,
Yeah.
and you have to like I would say don't leave it in your brain only. I know like
Mm.
sometimes we have to bring the man into the equation at some point, but it's like on what level do we do that?
Mhm.
Because I sometimes feel like we write it off to like they're not going to understand. They're not going to understand the feelings.
Oh, yeah.
Like the other day, my husband, he was like, I'm gonna put a desk in this room, and it's the room we had used for Esme. And I'm like, no, you're not, because that symbolically means something, like,
Yeah.
so like, to an extent, like, don't forget that you share your nervous system with somebody else. And,
Oof, that's
and
profound.
yeah, you do.
Yeah.
And don't forget to like have those hard, vulnerable conversations where you tell your spouse, like, hey, I feel old, or hey, I don't know if I can do this,
Mm.
and let them have a chance to like support you. They can't read your mind,
Yeah.
and you can kind of live in this make-believe land where like the most dangerous thinker is the person who doesn't voice it and doesn't allow other people to bring perspective to what they're
Ah,
thinking.
that's a
And
good.
I that is my brain type. Like I do that. I'm guilty of that.
Yeah.
And so just be aware, like bring them into it. The burden gets a little lighter if you share it with others.
It's.
I've shared, my thoughts, my deepest thoughts with some friends too. And like
Mhm.
they're able to encourage me and pray over me, and even their spouses were there too. Like I said these things around other men, and it was just like I left that night feeling so light. Like regardless of what happens or what decision we make, we
Yes.
like our burden became lighter, and because it was shared. And so
Mhm.
I hope for everybody. I know everybody doesn't have that, but like I would say seek that out, because you're gonna need that no matter what phase of life that you're in. So, yeah.
That's just all so good. This whole conversation was just so good. And yeah, just in closing, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. And like I said, for being courageous and brave and being willing to share with other women, because like you said, it really aligns with your core I think, intention, which is empowering other women. And by you sharing, and I know you know that, but by you sharing this, you're doing just that. And it means a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you for letting me share it on here.
I hope to speak to you soon, Jamie. Thank you again. And I will see all of you back here on YouTube, hopefully soon in life.
Yeah.
All right. Mwah. Bye, Jamie.
Bye-bye.